So I probably should have titled this something more like, what did it take Typeform to start thinking like a platform company? But my hope is here that we've extracted some kind of learnings from this that are more universally useful. So my name's Jason. I'm the CTO at Typeform. I've previously served as Chief Platform Officer as well, and we'll talk a little bit about how that's changed over time. I also worked previously on developer programs at PayPal, Braintree, Uship. So obviously my background is in kind of microservices and API development. Typeform's been much more of kind of the learning the business side of building all these APIs, and it's been really entertaining. So throughout this, we're going to touch on a couple of principles, and we're going to move quick because there's a lot of content and a lot of history that we're going to cover. So the first one, I think most of us that have been around APIs recognize what I mean by this. Build it and they'll come, right? The field of dreams. We build some APIs and serendipity will happen. In Typeform's case, we definitely did some of this in the early days. We built some APIs and they didn't exactly come. So breaking that down a little bit, one of our first offerings in the very early days was the uninventive or the uncreative named data API, which basically allowed people, again, Typeform builds forms if you haven't seen it before. So we kind of have this one question at a time format, and it's all really nice experience. But at the end of the day, our customers want to get their response data, essentially what was answered in that form, and get it into their systems. And this did the job, but because it was our only option, we were really getting hurt by polling. So if you haven't ever run into polling issues, it's a thing to watch out for. It's worth mentioning this was actually deprecated in August, and we'll come back to what that would look like. As an answer to that, a little while later, we launched webhooks, which has generally been a resounding success and adopted at a much higher rate. Again, this probably comes down to the type of data that people really want in responses. We can't have them calling us a few times a second. Anything new yet? Anything new yet? Instead, tell us where you want it sent, and when we get a response, we'll send it to you. It's better for everyone. We also experimented with a greenfield project we called Typeform IO. We didn't do the greatest job at explaining that was completely separate from .com. But it did teach us a lot about kind of the process that developers would go through in dynamically creating a form through APIs, collecting responses, that whole life cycle. But there was one clear feedback point, which is, gosh, we love Typeform.com, but this thing off on the side isn't connected, and we need it connected to make sense. So it definitely taught us some things and kind of gave us some learning to go forward with. This was also killed off in March. So again, we're going through history here. There's going to be a lot of death. So all of this kind of informed going down this kind of microservices journey, right? And as I just kind of grabbed one example of what this looks like. Oops, I should have hidden the JS there, but I'll explain it shortly. Basically, we would have looked before at our monolithic PHP app as one big system, and we started breaking that down. And even within one concept like designing a form, that actually turns into a whole series of kind of sub-elements. And where this is relevant for the business is that on one side, we were also rebuilding the front end of our product. So any Typeform users might remember that earlier this year we had our big V2 launch, which was really in some ways an architectural overhaul. So we used sometimes what we call BFFs, not our best friends, our back end for front end, right, as a way to kind of aggregate these complex services in the back end into more single, easy-to-use calls for our own front-end developers in building our form builder, for instance. On the other side, we're opening up some of these APIs, in this case, I think all of them, to our developer community. So we're kind of offering that up. And I think the platform thinking bit from this is, if you can design one set of APIs that serves both your own developers as your first community and the external community all in the same shot, that's your best case scenario, rather than sort of gluing on your public APIs on the side. So what do we learn from all this? I know I'm going fast. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of death. One is design for the future. And the way I would express this is look at your current architecture and ignore it as much as you can and think about what would you want it to look like as you design your services. Even if you're just putting a service layer on top of an existing application, make it look like you would think it should look in a few years. Make it your target architecture. And within this is kind of something I always say is try not to version, but always be ready to. In our case, we actually haven't versioned anything publicly because we just killed the old stuff and launched new things. But that has its own cost. And this applies to both versioning strategies and to launching replacement APIs. Is new stuff means dead stuff, right? You have to deprecate things. And the key to this is that it's a relationship management issue. If you have external partners or developer community who've built things on your APIs, you're going to have to communicate and communicate and communicate and have those one-on-one discussions with the kind of more powerful users here and figure out a timeline that makes sense for you both. So between the time that we decided to deprecate some of these things and the time that we actually did was pretty long. And a big component of that was, one, having the capacity to actually manage all those discussions, and two, that to reach some alignment with these various folks on a timeline that made sense on when they could transition, and also learning how they would migrate and realizing we had to build some extra tools to make that migration go smoothly. Another facet was looking back on it that developer evangelism, we talk about it constantly, advocacy and evangelism, whatever you want to call it, and it's not really enough. It's great to help developers get onboarded and feel loved and supported and make their jobs go better, but there's a business component to this too. There's a whole other set of personas involved in growing a business together when you start connecting your platforms. So the way I always express this is developers try and business buys. And so backing up to developers, what I mean by this is, all right, I'm looking for, I know I need to build forms into my product. Do I build that? Can I buy it? Can I, offer it to our users without paying anything? What are the options? I have to look at competitors. I have to compare, what does the kind of project timeline look like if I build it? These are the things going through our heads. And with developers, that's hands-on. We're just going to try it out. We're going to play with it and see what happens, see what breaks. On the business side, they're looking for that feedback. They're looking for that direction of, is this a good thing for us to integrate with? And I think in the past, we didn't really have those discussions as much, and so things didn't really reach the full potential they could have. So you'll notice, like in our, our developer portal, the first few paragraphs are always simple enough to understand even for business folks. So if they're skimming through our dev portal and saying, what can these guys do? We're always speaking business language first before we drop into the technical details, just as one example. So this is kind of our transition point here from looking back into the deep past, which at a relatively new startup like Typeform is 4 or 5 years, into the more recent history where we started looking at how we would measure the success of these things. So I mentioned KPIs for APIs. If you've never seen John Musser's kind of talk and blog post on this topic, it's brilliant work. To really, if you're new to this, realize API calls are generally a worthless metric other than a performance thing, right? This is about how are you going to get business buy-in? When you're talking with business folks, why are we doing this platform stuff? How does it move the needle? How does it affect our bottom line? And granted, there's going to be a bit of a SaaS twist to all this, because that's what we are. How many SaaS businesses in here represented? SaaS? No? Okay, all right, sorry. Hopefully it's universally useful. So we kind of stepped back and looked at what are our platform features, not just developer stuff. What are things that connect us with the ecosystem? So one thing that we knew we had, but just had never really paid attention to, is embedding. So obviously, getting a form embedded into your application is kind of a popular use case. And even developers don't need to be involved, because generally you can copy-paste a snippet, drop it in your CMS, and ta-da, there's a form. We also kind of remembered, oh yeah, we turned on this Zapier thing in the early days. And it's kind of a pain because it's polling us all the time. We hadn't shifted it to webhooks yet. But in terms of business performance, we hadn't really considered what it meant. So we went and we dug up all the data we could. And we put together some kind of perspective on, one, how can we get a leading metric, something that gives us a signal that this is bringing customers value, and that's adoption. Do customers choose to adopt it? And as a trailing metric, what effect does it have on our customer retention? Because we had some general notion that being more integrated makes customers more sticky. So in looking at this, I'll caveat this by saying this was a few years ago, and we've definitely gotten more sophisticated at how we measure. Some of this data was just wrong, we learned, but it gave us a fair enough comparative measure. So my point here is scrape up what you can and look at it if you haven't before. So the green moving left to right is going kind of from developer products to less developer products, and the green is looking at their adoption rate. So developers, very small adoption, right? Single-digit numbers. Things like embedding, lots of users were using it. In truth, it wasn't really 50%, it was kind of screwed up metrics, but it was a lot. Zapier shocked us all in realizing 30% of our paying customers were using Zapier. We really didn't realize that before and realized how important that relationship was. The retention lift here, this isn't a raw number, it's the improvement in customer retention versus customers that don't use integrated features at all. So you can see with developers, at that time, pretty much no one that had ever used our developer features had ever left us. So it quickly made us realize it's a very tiny population of very important relationships that we have to take super seriously because they're investing big in us and they're not going to go away. And for things like Zapier, of course, now realizing, wow, customers really need us integrated in order to be effective. So another thing we were hearing from customers is that Zapier's great for people who love Zapier, and for everyone else it's not so great, and they want these native options. They want an easy point-and-click way to connect to other products. We were worried at the time that, well, if we go build this native thing, it's just going to cannibalize Zapier usage. But as it turns out, it's a very low overlap. So we put together some kind of strategy at the time, and there was certainly more to it than this, but a quick vignette. We said, look, we're building these microservices that we know we're going to turn into a new set of APIs, and we know we're going to need a developer portal around it. We know we need some native integrations, and we know what customers are asking for, and we know, actually from Zapier, some idea of what's popular. And we knew that with embedding, it was already wildly popular, but we could make it better. We could make the user experience better, and we could give developers more fine-grained control. We also realized that in order to make all these things that we're saying we're going to do strategically happen, we needed a team, one, to manage those relationships, and two, to kind of drive the strategy throughout the company and make sure that everybody understood it and was thinking in a platform kind of way. So we set up 2 pillars for developer relations and business development. DevRel obviously connects with developer community and kind of does the technical side of the partnership relationship. BizDev obviously is there to help drive strategic partnerships and get us connected with other platforms. Now, in reality, this is sort of a almost consulting group for the rest of the company. We worked with every other department in the company, and this is the team that I ran at the time. And by the way, the red is where I'm definitely looking to talk to folks if you're into DevRel. But anyways, we worked to drive this throughout the company and get it kind of sunk into everybody's heads and understand what we're talking about. It was a new thing, right? So we managed to get some of the things we said we would get done. About a year ago, we launched developer.typeform.com, which wasn't just a bunch of content, right? This was a whole new suite of APIs. So Create API allowed us, in that chart you saw earlier, to deal with creating forms through API calls. Responses API gave us that replacement for our data API, that its payload matched much more closely with the webhooks that we had launched, making client code a lot more reusable. Webhooks API, where essentially if you've created a form dynamically, you need to quickly tell us where you want the responses sent to. So you need to be able to configure that through code as well. And finally, the kind of SDK for developers to have very fine-grained control of seamlessly integrating our form into their product. We also kind of realized that, you know, this integrated functionality is so important to our customers, but we give it very little visibility in the product. So we went into kind of the tab where you're configuring your form and just did a quick kind of redesign of it. And as we'll see, this had a pretty profound effect later. So along this process of building these new products, we kind of started to get a better and better refined understanding of our metrics and kind of get more nuanced with it. So instead of just looking at adoption overall amongst all users of all time, we started looking at, hey, someone just signed up. In that first week, if we get them using some kind of integrated feature, we generally see that that correlates to really low churn, right? And again, in a SaaS business, retaining your customers is critical. So we see this integrations panel redesign earlier this year, around the same time that we launched MailChimp native integration and Google Sheets, and all of a sudden that adoption rate jumped up. And actually, as we dug into this, some of this is definitely that Google Sheets is wildly popular, but even if you take it away, there's still a big uptick, and it's not from MailChimp. It's from that visibility change. It's making things discoverable. So anyways, that's basically just saying that while you might look simple early, it gets more refined over time as you start to understand what the strongest indicators are. And then, again, our churn kind of perspective changed over time as we really refined our understanding of what we meant by churn in our business and who was really a customer. So this is not a good comparative slide to the earlier, but the point is that As it stands today, we generally see that any integrated feature has at least a 50% improvement on retention. HubSpot, one of our more recent ones, seems to be really high, but we've also learned over time, loyal, dedicated customers will try new things. So when it's new, be a little cautious for a while. It's a trailing indicator, and it takes 3 to 6 months to see it settle into a groove. These other ones were higher at the beginning, too. So as we started kind of soaking up platform thinking as a company this year and got some products out there and we could all kind of touch and feel and understand it, we realized that taking that standalone platform team and kind of merging it into the rest of the company started to make sense. And this is really just to highlight that it depends on the company, it depends on the kind of people and the way that you think about platform as to whether or not you should have a standalone team or if it should be, sort of subgroups. So much like mentioned before, we also kind of deal with cross-functional teams. One of those kind of colonies, we went on a bee-based theme, so we have swarms and colonies, is our platform colony now. So we kind of added that focus that we're going to deal with developers and partners directly, both from an experience standpoint and from the domains that they find important, as well as kind of a cross-cutting microservices team dealing with things like logging and instrumentation and all that hard stuff that everyone here is complaining about. Embedded within this colony are a variety of other disciplines, so we have data scientists and customer success folks, whatever. So we kind of wanted to call out that these two pillars of the former standalone platform team we would consider embedded in the platform colony, because we want that feedback from partners, from developers, kind of stories from the field to come as close as we can to the product teams that are building the next thing, right? Even though from a reporting standpoint, our biz dev now reports to our new COO, which makes sense, right? Because now we have a more clear business accountability for the things that we're doing from the platform side. So looking to the future, because I'm down to 5 minutes, kind of what's our next chapter? So one big thing that we kind of learned is that this visibility is key. And so it really kind of gave us the confidence to move forward with getting started on kind of a marketplace environment, a place where whether we've built some kind of native integration, developer-related stuff, non-native integrations, meaning our partners like Autopilot or Trello, where you can go interact with your Typeform data inside those products. You don't see it in Typeform at all. Giving them a place to, for Typeform customers to find out about their brands is really important to those partners. We also took a second pass at that integrations panel to kind of, refresh it for this marketplace perspective, that it's not just a big list of stuff. We already hit the point with a very small number of things we've built so far that it starts to get overwhelming. So breaking things down in categories, maybe providing search, providing more context. One of the other things that we plan to do with this is we've been asking questions for new signups. What is it that you do? What's your persona? We can start to kind of tweak and target, hey, these are the things we think would be the most useful for you. So the point here is, as the options increase, which even if we built nothing, lots of people are building on top of us, giving visibility to those things and helping people find the right thing for their use case to get the data where it needs to be, that's really the key. So kind of, as I said, discoverability is one of the main reasons that we started on this. The other, as I mentioned, is kind of this partner visibility and connection with our customers, especially for platforms of similar, maybe smaller size. This is a big deal for them to be able to get access to our audience, right? So it's a big kind of selling point for those partners. The other thing to think about is that, in a way, from kind of an SEO standpoint, we're attracting a different kind of customer than we have in the past. We haven't had a lot of public property dedicated to explaining this integration story to our customers, and now we're attracting them from the front door. So it's changing the composition of customers that we have, and again, important for our SaaS business to retain customers. And the other is learning market demand. We see people browsing around, and just in the last 3 weeks since we launched this, we're already seeing certain categories with way higher clicks, starting to tell us this is what people are looking for, these are the kinds of partners that we need, these are the kinds of integrations we need to build in-house. So what's next for us? One is lots more integrations. The way that we have made that happen internally is basically we're building the ability for developers to upload their own apps or integrations into Connect. That's not out there yet, but we've been using it in-house. We don't eat dog food, we drink champagne. So we're drinking our own champagne and trying it out for now. But we are interested in anybody looking to kind of work with us on that. So if you're interested in it, in some kind of early preview over the next few months, you can talk to myself or Nicolas up here in the front row. And with that, thank you very much.